Originally, when I joined the band, it was a five-piece band. Everybody was part of this corporation.
He was the quiet force behind the most iconic guitar solo in rock history. The man who helped define an era with a 12-string guitar in his Malibu home. But behind the shimmering success of the Eagles, Don Felder found himself pushed aside, silenced, and finally fired by facts. This isn't just another music feud. It's a story of betrayal, power, and one man's fight to reclaim his voice. If you think you know the Eagles, think again. In 1974, Don Felder joined the Eagles, and everything changed. His arrival transformed the band's sound from mellow country rock into something sharper, bolder. He brought more than just skill. He brought soul. His playing added fire to their melodies and gave birth to the haunting, unforgettable atmosphere of Hotel California. That guitar solo, the one burned into rock history, Felder wrote that alone in his home, recording a simple demo that would become a masterpiece. His contribution wasn't just musical, it was spiritual. But while his strings told stories, behind the scenes, something else was building: imbalance. The Eagles weren't just a band, they were a business. At first, everyone shared equally. All 5 members were part of Eagles Limited, a corporation built on equal stakes and creative unity. But fame does strange things. As the band's popularity soared, Don Henley and Glenn Frey began taking control, deciding which songs made the cut, who got credit, and most importantly, how the money was split. Felder saw the shift. The band he had helped define was being reshaped behind closed doors, and he was being locked out. He asked questions. Why were 2 people receiving more than the rest? Why were creative ideas from other members constantly shut down? His concerns weren't met with discussion. They were met with silence. And then came the whispers. Felder was difficult, uncooperative, even threatening the unity of the band. But the truth was, he was standing up for fairness. What followed wasn't a resolution. It was a shutdown. When the Eagles reunited in 1994 for the Hell Freezes Over tour, tensions hit a boiling point. Felder was still excluded from key decisions, but expected to perform, tour, and play along. Behind the harmonies, there was hierarchy, and in 2001, it all exploded. Felder was fired. No meeting, no warning. Just a cold, impersonal fax that ended his time with the band he helped define. That fax didn't just end his job, it tried to erase his legacy. But Felder didn't vanish. He fired back, with a lawsuit. The claims? Breach of contract, wrongful removal, and unfair profit distribution. The legal battle pulled back the curtain on a band that once stood for unity and exposed a power structure driven by ego and money. Suddenly, the media wasn't talking about the Eagles' music. They were talking about control, betrayal, and the ugly truths behind closed doors. Felder, once a quiet guitarist, was now the center of rock's most explosive legal showdown. He didn't stop there. In 2008, Felder released Heaven and Hell: My Life in the Eagles, a memoir that shook the foundation of the band's carefully curated image. It was raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal. In it, he wrote not just about the music, but about the manipulation, the rejection, and the decades-long imbalance that defined his time in the band. He named names. He described meetings where his voice was ignored, tours where he felt like an employee, not a partner. And he made one thing clear. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Henley and Frey were furious. Legal teams moved fast, trying to suppress parts of the audiobook. But Felder held firm. "I didn't write it to destroy anyone," he said. "If I wanted to, it would have been a lot heavier." That comment landed hard. It suggested there were still things unsaid. But Felder wasn't just swinging punches, he was reclaiming space. He was putting his version of events into history, whether anyone liked it or not. The book stirred fans and critics alike. Some accused Felder of digging up the past for attention, but for many, the memoir was an essential look into how legendary bands aren't always as harmonious as their songs suggest. Felder admitted his flaws. He owned up to his temper, his moments of exhaustion, and even times when he considered walking away. But that honesty, combined with the pain, made the story real. It wasn't just about the Eagles, it was about survival. And while the lawsuit settled quietly in 2007, the damage had already been done. Felder had become an outsider to the very thing he helped build. But instead of retreating, he picked up his guitar. And what came next would surprise everyone. After stepping away from the chaos, Don Felder did something unexpected. He didn't try to chase former glory. He didn't beg to be let back in. Instead, he created something new. In 2012, he released Road to Forever, an album born from over a decade of bottled-up emotion. It wasn't a commercial stunt. It was personal. Each track carried pieces of his story: loss, betrayal, reinvention. Felder proved he could still write, still play, and more importantly, still lead without anyone else's permission. And he didn't stop there. In 2019, he released American Rock and Roll, bringing in rock legends like Slash, Mick Fleetwood, Chad Smith, and Sammy Hagar. It was a powerful message. His peers hadn't forgotten him. They still respected him, not for drama, but for his craft. Felder was no longer under anyone's control. He had built a creative life on his own terms. Even in his 70s, Felder kept going. He toured steadily across the country. Not stadiums like before, but theaters, rock cruises, and festivals. The fans came not just for nostalgia, but for him. Yes, he always played Hotel California, but it was never a gimmick. He played it note for note, just as he had decades earlier. Not to dwell on the past, but to honor the music and the fans who never stopped believing in him. In 2025, he took it even further. The Vault 50 Years of Music was more than just a collection. It was a time capsule. Full of unreleased demos, reworked classics, and new material, the album showcased his entire journey. Collaborators included members of Toto, Steve Lukather, David Paich, Joseph Williams, all legends in their own right, all willing to stand beside Felder on his terms. He wasn't a former Eagle anymore. He was a creator in his own right, and the respect was real. But that same year, something sobering happened. During a live performance on the Rock Legends cruise, Felder collapsed mid-song. The track was Tequila Sunrise. He was rushed to a medical facility. Thankfully, it wasn't fatal, just severe dehydration due to brutal weather. After a few days of recovery, Felder released a message. He was okay and planned to return soon. But the incident was a reminder. At 77, every show, every note now came with more weight. Still, Felder didn't slow down. He never used age as an excuse. He kept writing, kept touring, kept teaching. In fact, education became a big part of his mission. He led guitar workshops, joined music panels, and supported free music programs for kids. For him, music was never just about fame. It was a way to connect, to heal, to stay human. And through it all, one thing became clear. Felder wasn't trying to rewrite history. He wasn't bitter, but he hadn't forgotten either. In recent interviews, he said, being kicked out of the Eagles was a blessing. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it forced him to find himself. He described the experience as learning the difference between cooperation and obedience. And that distinction changed everything. He even tried to reconcile with Glenn Frey before Frey passed in 2016, but never got a response. Felder still showed up to the memorial service. He didn't fake sentiment. He simply said, "I'm not happy that Glenn died, but I'm not pretending we were close." That honesty, even in grief, set the tone for his growth. As for Don Henley, the two remained distant. They exchanged polite nods at industry events, but little more. Felder has never gone on a smear campaign, even though he still disagrees with how Henley handled things. Instead of using interviews to rehash pain, he uses them to explain growth. "I choose to live in the present," he said. It wasn't a retreat, it was a boundary. He's made it clear, forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about letting go of the poison. In seminars and workshops, he speaks about what it's like to create in environments that don't value your voice. He calls it invisible burnout, a feeling that artists face when their talents are used, but their identities are erased. His advice to young musicians? Never confuse being included with being valued. Since 2020, Felder has appeared on podcasts, documentaries, and music panels. Not to stir controversy, but to share what he's learned. Journalists push him for dirt. He declines. Because now, Felder speaks with intention. If it doesn't serve healing or clarity, he leaves it alone. That restraint is rare, and it gives his words more weight than any expose ever could. He doesn't need to go back. He doesn't need an apology. And he said it outright. "I did what I had to do. If it's not in the official record, it's in the music." That's not a defensive remark. It's a powerful reminder that truth outlives spin. And nowhere is that truth more evident than in the final minutes of his live shows. As the lights dim and the opening notes of Hotel California ring out, Felder becomes what he's always been. Not a headline, not a fired bandmate, but a guitarist with something to say.